Hi everyone. Hello and welcome back to another wonderful day here at the online summit Connecting Soul Beings. Today it is my utmost pleasure to introduce you to Jessica Moore from the Unlocked Heart. Jessica is based in the United States and she is an emotion whisperer and a shamanic practitioner. Jessica and I are talking today about emotions and how we recognize our emotions and what do we do with them when we do recognize them. We talk about grounding, we talk about Qi Gong, and also how do emotions impact our animals. So grab yourself a cup of tea or a coffee and enjoy this wonderful conversation. So Jessica, just for the audience, I would love to find out more about you and how you got into the work that you do as an emotion whisperer. That's really interesting. It's a lovely name.
Yeah, I got into this actually by learning about the value of emotions the hard way. I was always, I was quite sensitive as a kid and quite introverted and had a kind of hard time relating with other kids when I was young. And so I actually learned to kind of shut down my emotional feeling and sort of withdraw into my own kind of inner world, more of a mental world, as a coping mechanism, a coping strategy to like protect myself from getting hurt and rejected by other kids and stuff, because I didn't have many friends growing up, and at least when I was young. And so I actually really, I grew up watching Star Trek and reading, and I really emulated, Data on Next Generation, the android who didn't have emotions. Like, he was like my hero. So yep. I really, and I kind of had that, the message in from my family growing up was, that to be mature and responsible and to be in control of your emotions and, very rational and sort of looking down on emotions. And so, but because of this, I really was lived up in my head. And so I was very ungrounded growing up. And for much of my life, it's kind of been one of my things I've always struggled with. And yeah, like a lot of sensitive people can relate to that, I'm sure. And so as I sort of was on eventually, after many years, started moving in a more spiritual direction and a path of personal growth, I started realizing that my authenticity, my authentic self, was much more connected to the heart. So learning the value of being connected to the heart, and okay, so how do I get there from being, kind of a up in my head kind of person? And so that's really where I learned the value of emotions, I would say, is that journey back to reclaim my full emotional feeling and really realizing how much I was shut down. By sort of being up in my head and not really spending time, like I was disconnected from my heart, I would say.
Okay.
And and then the other piece about ungrounding, that because we're going to talk about that, I'm sure.
Yes.
That I think ungrounding kind of goes hand in hand with being disconnected from our feelings, because really sinking into our feelings is very grounding by nature. And being up in the head tends to be ungrounding. But I really had a kind of a come to Jesus moment when in my shamanic community that I was a part of. And I was really fortunate to have found a set of shamanic teachings that was very grounded. And so, because not all spiritual, paths are have that. And really sort of was held to account at one point where I kind of had a crisis in the shamanic community of other community members and our shaman letting me know that I wasn't, that my ungrounding was actually impacting the people around me. And so that's where I really started to learn the importance of managing my own energy and the reason and how me being grounded actually, whether or not I'm grounded or not, has an impact.
Yes.
So,
yeah. Oh, major impact, I can imagine. Yeah, definitely. Hmm. So in terms of the grounding, I mean, because that's something that I can appreciate that a lot of people may struggle with at times. And in particular, when you start learning about your spirituality, channels opening up and having these connections and all the different skill sets that come with that. What is your favorite way to ground?
Mm. Probably my favorite daily practice for grounding is doing more qigong in the morning to help me really get into my body at the beginning of the day. What I prefer to do is just like jump on the computer when I first wake up. Not so helpful.
Yes.
So
I know how that feels.
yeah. So cultivating that discipline of doing a physical practice. The reason why I like qigong is because it has that meditative aspect that's very calming and focused with the mind, but it involves movement and is really about relating with the body and moving the energy, in the body, and especially connecting with the yin below and the yang above, and really balancing those. It's not all about up, 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 and light, light, light. It's actually equally about darkness and stillness, and that the restoration and the connecting to that is really how we ground, is by going downward. So I find that very helpful.
Yeah, fascinating. I see them in the park here sometimes in Sydney, a whole group of people that are doing those movements, and it fascinates me how quiet that is and how focused at the same time. That's because we're always in this rush mode, right? We want to do everything quickly.
Yes.
And if we feel that we need to exercise, that it has to be, either in the gym or running or, playing tennis, some sort of sport, which is usually fast. But then seeing that, it's wonderful to watch because you can feel the energy coming off them as well at the same time.
Yeah. And so that it really helps to cultivate that sense of mindfulness. And so being present with the body, anything that's present with the body, like a meditation that is not up in the head kind of a meditation, but really one of my favorite ways of doing that is actually just going out and sitting in nature, and just focusing on my physical senses.
Yes.
And yeah, that's also a bit of a joy practice, because just the beauty of nature is very uplifting as well, but still grounding, because it helps me to calm and still the mind. So yeah, and then applying that to my emotions and actually choosing, has required a choice. I mean, it requires a choice to take the time to actually turn my awareness inward and actually pay attention to what I'm feeling, because that's something that for a lot of people, their emotions are right there and they can't really get away. But for me, I've really had through my whole life, I had learned to really ignore how I was feeling.
Yeah. So how can we tap more into that? How can we really, feel the feeling, but then also know what to do with that, so that it brings us to a place of, perhaps more comfort, or a place of, now I can shift slightly. How do you do that?
Yeah, the simple method that I talk about, like on my blog and stuff, is it's very simple. It's basically just going within and noticing how I'm feeling in the moment. It can be really helpful to actually have a list of emotion words, because to be able to name what we're feeling, because I've learned, and this is actually shown in research too on emotions and empathy, that the more accurately and specifically we can name what we're feeling, the greater our actually capacity to feel. Like we actually have a broader range of nuance in our emotions. And so like if we don't have a name for sadness, we literally wouldn't really be able to feel sadness. We would just feel this vague sense of bad or down. But and so there's a level of emotional intelligence that comes with the naming. And then once we name what we're feeling, and also locating it in the body, helps to make it not a mental exercise, but a physical embodied exercise. We can actually then start to relate to the emotion or that part in us that's feeling a certain way. Like, oh, my throat feels really choked up and really full of grief right now. So, okay, so grief, what are you telling me? Like, what do I need? What do you suggest that I actually do with this right now? And then we can start to act on our emotions in ways that our emotions are wanting us to take action on, because all emotions arise for us to do something with them. So the sooner we can recognize what they're trying to tell us and then actually do that thing, the sooner the grief will release on its own, and we don't have to sort of fall into a trap that we can fall into of trying to release our emotions by avoiding feeling them. Instead, we can release our emotions by actually going in them and really feeling them and giving them a chance to, and really being present with them. And then taking whatever action is needed so that they actually are informing our lives and making us wiser. You could say giving us access to our emotional wisdom body.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. And it's so important, isn't it? Because that runs through everything that we do on an everyday basis.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's important because when we aren't feeling our own emotions, we can actually outsource them onto other people and animals. That, the people around us, the beings around us, will end up picking up our emotions and oftentimes end up feeling them as their own. And we can do that for other people as well. People who are highly sensitive, I call them hyper empaths. It's like that's something. And people who have really their boundaries aren't adequate to really to keep that separation of, these are my emotions, not your emotions. And people who are very sensitive can pick up stuff from everyone around them, because our emotions are highly contagious.
Yes. Wow. So do we do that consciously, to outsource the emotions, as you say it?
I'd say, like 99.99 whatever % of the time, it's not conscious. And part of that is also just supporting each other in relationships. So there's a certain amount of this called emotion work that we do for each other in life, that when we need like a shoulder to cry on. That's literally they're helping to hold space for us and our emotions, and helping to ground us, helping us to release and all of that. Or if we need someone to complain to, to have a little, hopefully conscious complaining session with. And all the ways. But a lot of times that happens, I would say the vast majority of the time, we're not really thinking in terms of, oh, this person is actually helping me to manage my own emotions.
No, we wouldn't normally say that, would we?
Yeah.
No, exactly. And you mentioned earlier about us also sending the emotions to the animals as well, like handing it over to them. And from personal experience, I know what that's like. And from personal experience and working with clients, I know that is a very frequent occurrence, that our animals are taking on what we are experiencing and what we're feeling. What's your experience in that field?
Yeah, so I can give an example of my parents. They had a dog. He just recently passed away. He was very old, so he lived a full life. But he was a Belgian Shepherd, and so I think a more sensitive breed, but he was a sensitive personality. So he was highly attuned to the people around him, and he would notice everything. And when people would get angry and have an argument around him, it would freak him out. Like he would start running around and like, oh my gosh, what's happening? And it was like it would scare him or activate his own nervous system. It's that just sort of activation. And he probably didn't even know what to do with it, but he's feeling it because emotions spread. That's the aspect of empathy that that we can't control. Like if we're like babies in a room, they'll all start crying. If one baby starts crying, it's like it just spreads. So he would run around And but he wouldn't leave. It was as if he felt it was his responsibility to try to do something and to try to help. And so he would come up and get in everyone's face and be like licking and like, oh my gosh, are you okay? Are you okay? And like trying to make everyone okay. Yeah. Partly because it's like he wanted everything, he felt like it was his job, I think, on some level. And also because it's his pack and something's wrong in the pack, he wants to help. But he also, I think, it was so activating for him in his own nervous system that, it's that unconscious desire to help people or to calm people down, because it actually helps us to calm down. Mm-hmm. It's like, so, so he was very effective. So I think that's a really good example of how we can, unfortunately, have a unhelpful impact on our animals.
Yes. Very much so. Very much so. So do you work with animals as well and people to recognize that?
I do not. I would probably leave that up to the experts like you. But I feel like where my specialty is working with people to help empower them with greater skills to manage their own emotions, so that they can be a grounding force in the world for everyone around them. So their animals, their children, or just in relationships, to gain those greater skills.
Yeah, beautiful. Emotions. Yeah, wonderful. Awesome. I love it. I noticed your title on your website has got Unlocking Heart or Unlocked Heart. When you talk about the grounding and the connecting to the emotions, it makes me feel like it really locks it into place to be more grounded and working with these emotions for us to go into a certain action place to work it in that way. Unlocking the heart. Is that your interpretation of, okay, we're really starting to dig into what this is and we're just bringing that all to the surface, and therefore we're opening it up to have those experiences? It's really interesting how, if that's the case, and I would love for you to talk around that a bit more, how that's interpreted as well in terms of locking or unlocking. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I would say that's part of it. It's so getting the accessing our heart and being able to, so that starts with noticing what's there so that we're not shut down. And also the other piece of it is to learn to speak the language of emotions. Yes. I'm actually trained in an emotion modality by the author of the book, The Language of Emotions. So it's very apropos. Learning to really speak their language, because each emotion, she identifies 17 emotions, and each emotion has its own message, its own general purpose. And then of course it can be specific for us relating to our life, and also wounds in our past as well. Sometimes it's not about the present moment, it's about a past moment. But yeah, to be able to gain all the access and the wisdom and the information, and also the skills that our emotions, I wouldn't even say skills, more like just straight up abilities, like our ability to release things and to let go and to ground. Those are all gifts of sadness, for example. It's very soft sadness, not necessarily a mood state sadness where I actually can identify, oh, I feel sad right now, but how the emotions, when they run in the background, they actually allow us. So like a sadness might be like I was going for a light, and I'm like trying to get somewhere, and then the light turns right in front of me, and I kind of go, that sigh of, it's like I'm letting go in that moment of my attachment to making it through that light, and just, and it brings us into a greater acceptance of the moment. So it's an example, and every emotion has its gifts. There are no such thing as positive and negative emotions in that way.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
In the wisdom that they have for us.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So would you see it as a positive all the time? Because it's something that they're teaching us?
It's a message. So as another teacher of mine likes to say, emotions are just information.
Right.
So you could just think of them as messengers.
Mm-hmm.
And the information sometimes is not at all what we want to hear. Like,
Yes.
this job is sucking your soul and you need, to, quit, even though it is paying all my bills. So there can be hard things, or there's still something in my past that I need to heal, something unresolved in my past, because this person cutting me off on the freeway just brings up all this rage. Just like feels way out of proportion to someone just cutting me off.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Whoa. Okay. All right. That's a sign, So once we learn to be able to track our emotions to what they're trying to tell us, the challenge is when we don't have those, when we don't know what it's telling us and we just feel overwhelmed. And then, so the impact of our emotions can be very negative. If we don't have skills.
Yeah,
so that's
exactly.
kind of my mission.
Yeah, wonderful. And hence you're here as well. Because I love that. Because you've got a really interesting take on how we deal with emotions. And it's very unusual in my mind. I've not met someone like you who looks at it from that aspect as well. So that's really fascinating. So in terms of what the audience is doing right now, like what is the general population doing right now with their emotions that you feel that they can change?
So the main thing that so many people are doing, it comes from modern day spirituality, from past spirituality, Christianity and pretty much every major religion, and also pop culture, like Star Trek, being rational.
Yes.
That to think of, the mind is good, emotions are not as good, and also to think in terms of positive and negative emotions. That we want to feel happiness, so sort of chasing happiness all the time, or inner peace, which I would say is actually the emotion of contentment. And also it can just be a neutral baseline, but sort of chasing that all the time and pushing it, what that does is it actually sets up a situation within us where we end up struggling against our own emotions. And we try to not feel what we're feeling, and it actually creates a lot of emotional dysfunction, because then other emotions have to step in to do the job that emotion is trying to do. For example, anger. So a very often vilified emotion. If, say we have a boss that's always crossing our boundaries, disrespecting us, and we're feeling angry every time we go to work. So granted, feeling angry every time we go to work isn't necessarily helpful, but it's trying to get us to make some sort of change, to stand up for ourselves in some way. And if we are just spending all our time trying to not feel that emotion, we're going to lose the ability to stand up for ourselves. And we can actually train ourselves, we can actually exile certain emotions altogether and train ourselves to never feel that emotion, which means that other emotions have to step up, so that instead of anger setting a boundary, in a soft, hopefully soft anger, setting a boundary, just saying, no, thank you. I'm good. I don't need that. Then we might set a boundary instead with anxiety. Like, oh gosh, okay, here, okay, so I'll do that, but here, let me do, and that kind of tension. And or we might set a boundary with shame, and just end up saying yes to everything and just try to do everything we can. And so it doesn't work, because those aren't the emotions to actually help us set boundaries. So, and we can also set up a situation where the anger just starts cycling and just gets more and more amped up, because it's saying, you're not listening to me, you're not listening to me, I really have to yell at you because you're not listening to me.
Yeah. And that can cause the blow-ups, right?
Yeah.
And then, all hell breaks loose. For sure.
Yeah. And then the other challenge is when people aren't grounded enough, and when they don't have good enough boundaries, which kind of comes from exiling sadness and grief and not wanting to feel down, not wanting to feel low, or exiling anger and just wanting to be loving and forgiving all the time. can actually impair our boundaries or impair our grounding. And then we lose access to the two single biggest tools that we have, other than just simply paying attention to our emotions, the biggest emotion skills that actually help us to, because grounding allows us to release emotions that aren't ours, or to let go of an emotion in a situation if it's too amped up, and to down regulate our nervous system. Mm-hmm. And boundaries helps us to keep, to not take on emotions of other people. Which can cause all kinds of havoc with our own emotions.
Yes. Definitely. Yeah. And in particular, when you're an empath, as you mentioned earlier, then, you know, boundaries are even more important than to people who may not be an empath. So it's, you know, because you're really soaking in everything else that's happening around you. So, yeah, wonderful. So what's the one tip that you could provide that we can practice straight away to help us with the emotions?
So, having a daily grounding practice, and because grounding is, so there's two things that help us to ground. It's our daily choices, you know, not spending all day on the computer and then just going straight to bed, but actually taking time to be in our body, to be present with ourselves, to bring our awareness back to the present moment, and also focusing on cultivating that downward connection with the earth. So daily choices, and actually a daily practice. Even if that's just, I wake up every morning and I go sit outside for 15 minutes and appreciate and watch the hummingbirds at the hummingbird feeder, or like whatever really works for us, but sort of that we can commit to. But it's going to be even more effective if we can actually spend a little time visualizing, actually reaching down to the center of the earth and feeling our connection there, and actually cultivating energetically our grounding cord and that energetic connection that we have to the earth, and making sure it's as big as it needs to be. Maybe it kind of, you know, fluff it out, run energy through it, and so tending it with a visualization. And then we can do the same thing, boundaries as well. So there's the daily choices to actually say no to things that we need to say no to only say yes to things that are true yeses for us, and also to enforce our boundaries when we need to. We actually have to be willing to stand up for them. But also every day, and I actually incorporate this into my Qigong practice, because there are some Qigong forms that do this, of placing your hands on your boundary. And you can think of your boundary energetically as about half the distance from your full personal space here. So this is like where I'm aware of as sort of a sense of my personal space, but our boundaries are about half, because people can be within arm's reach and we don't necessarily feel like they're violating our boundaries. So it's a little bit closer in, I feel. And I think in Qigong, it's generally considered about half an arm's length. And then spend time running qi into it, tending it, you know, filling any gaps that we might notice are there, actually empowering it, and making sure that by the end of our time tending to it, we can see it or feel it or sense it with our, intuitive senses as a full sphere all the way around us. And taking time to do that every day, because we actually impact our energy body. We actually can create energetic habits, by consistent daily choices over the course of our lifetime, and beliefs. So like the belief that it's not safe to set boundaries we might have learned in childhood, or the belief that anger is always bad and you always need to make everyone happy. You know, those kind of programming messages we can get that can actually cause us to actually create an energetic habit of either disabling our boundaries or making them just very porous, not robust enough. So,
wow, thank you. Wow, that's amazing. That's a very unusual way of doing that. I've never heard that before. That's really fantastic. Yeah, wonderful. Wow, I can talk about this all day. It's really cool.
Me too.
Fantastic. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Jessica. That was absolutely amazing. And I'm sure that the audience is going to go out and about now to try to, to work it in terms of the energies and the boundary thing, but also to become more aware of the emotions and, like you say, to work with them rather than identifying, well, that's positive, negative, or pushing it downwards as well. And applying the grounding practices, that's really important. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you for putting this on.
And
I hope everyone out there goes out and grounds every day.
Absolutely.
I think the world will be an even more powerful place. Yeah.
For sure. Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you.